Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're heading east to unpack the history of how China got its name.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And you know what's so interesting about all of this? It's more than just a name.
Oh, definitely.
It's all about evolution. Like how this name evolved over time. It reflects like all these changes that happened in China.
Right, and not just changes like internal changes within the country, like cultural identity shifts, but also like how their relationships with other cultures changed over time.
Totally. So to help us unpack all of this, we have some really cool excerpts from an ancient Chinese text.
Yeah, I mean, think about it, right? The name China in Chinese is Zhongguo.
Right.
And it's not like somebody just like decided one day, oh, this is what we're going to call it.
Right. It's not like they just like...
Yeah, it wasn't just like, bam, China.
Yeah, exactly. So taking it back to the very beginning, this name first pops up in a text called the Shangshu.
That's right.
And this text is basically like one of the most important texts in ancient Chinese literature. Like it's part of what they call the five classics.
Yeah, so if you want to understand like the earliest Chinese thought,
Yes.
philosophical and political thought,
You got to read the Shangshu.
the Shangshu is the place to go.
Yeah, and in the Shangshu, when we first see this name Zhongguo,
Right.
it doesn't even refer to a country.
That's the thing. It's not about a country at all back then.
It meant the central region.
It's central region.
So it's like a geographical concept, right?
It's absolutely. It's all about geography.
But even then, central, you know,
Yeah.
that concept of central wasn't like set in stone.
No.
It could like totally change depending on
Context. Context is key. Who was using it
who's saying it, why they're saying it.
and what they were talking about.
Exactly. For example, like when they were talking about the emperor,
Right.
central would basically mean the area that he directly controlled. Like that was his domain.
Right.
That was the central region.
But then you have like the Huaxia people,
Right.
and they lived in the Yellow River Valley, and they later became known as like the Han Chinese.
Right.
For them, central referred to their own cultural heartland.
Right. So their like cultural center.
It was like their core.
Their home.
Yeah, their home, their civilization.
Exactly. And so already we can see
Yeah.
from the very beginning that this name is tied to geography, but it's also tied to
Identity. It's about how they saw themselves.
how people saw themselves.
In the world, exactly.
Yeah. And this idea that they were
Central.
the center right,
And the Middle Kingdom.
that had a huge impact on
Oh, yeah.
how the Huaxia
Yeah.
viewed the groups living around them.
Because, of course, if you're in the center,
Right.
everyone else is on the periphery.
And they often labeled those other groups as barbarians.
Barbarian, that's right.
But then we have this major turning point in Chinese history
Oh, yeah.
when Emperor Qin Shi Huang
Qin Shi Huang.
unifies China in 221 BC.
Big moment, right?
Huge moment.
Unification of China.
Yeah. And he wasn't just conquering territory.
No.
He's bringing all these different groups of people together,
Bringing them all together.
you know, making them live together.
Forcing them to interact.
Yeah. And so it makes you wonder,
Mm-hmm.
like at that point, did they think about changing the name?
Yeah, you'd think, right.
You'd think with a new emperor,
New dynasty, new emperor, new everything.
new everything, you'd think they'd want to like, you know,
Make their mark.
yeah, make their own mark.
Stamp their authority.
But they didn't. They
Yeah.
kept using Zhongguo.
Exactly. Which shows you how important that concept had become.
Yeah, it was already super ingrained
Yeah, it was deeply rooted.
in their culture by that point.
Absolutely. And I think the unification actually intensified those interactions between these different groups.
Like the who.
Like the Huaxia, you have the Xiongnu, the Chang people. All these different groups are now coming into closer contact.
And I'm sure it wasn't always,
Peaceful?
there was conflict, there was competition.
Yeah.
But it's like this cultural melting pot starting to like
Bubble up.
bubble up. Yeah. And within that melting pot,
Yeah.
the Huaxia, they kind of emerged as like the dominant group.
Right.
And through alliances, through assimilation, they really shaped the cultural landscape.
Of what we now know as China.
Exactly. And this had a big impact on other groups too,
Yeah.
like the Xiongnu, the Western regions peoples, the Xianbei, the Wuan, many of the Qing people.
Wow.
They all came under Chinese rule during the Han Dynasty.
Ah, the Han Dynasty.
The Han Dynasty. This is where things get really interesting.
Yes. Because this is when we start to see
The shift.
the shift from
Huaxia.
Huaxia to Han.
Yeah, but it's not just a name change.
Right.
It's way more nuanced than that.
Yeah. So unpack that for us.
Okay, so the Han Dynasty, they were powerful. culturally influential. And as they started absorbing these other groups, the term Han,
it started to represent this new blended identity.
Like a hybrid identity almost.
Yeah. And it replaced those older terms like Huaxia, Huaxia. All those kind of got phased out.
So essentially the name Han reflects a China that was already multi-ethnic.
Exactly. Back then already.
Wow. It's amazing how...
I know, it's wild.
A word can carry so much historical baggage.
So much history in just one word.
But here's the thing that I found totally mind-blowing.
Okay, what is it?
We've been talking all about Zongo, right?
Right.
But for all this talk, no dynasty.
Yeah.
Before the 20th century actually used Zongo as their official name.
That's right. Officially, it wasn't the name.
It's crazy.
Think about it. All those dynasties, like the Xia, the Shang, the Zhou, the Qin, the Han, all the way through the Yuan, the Ming, the Qing.
Yeah.
They didn't use Zongo as their official name.
So when does China, as an official name, enter the picture?
Well, it's actually through contact with the West that China gains traction. Yeah. So in the late Ming and early Qing dynasties, Western missionaries, they start using China, or Chinese Empire, to refer to the country.
So basically, Westerners are giving the Chinese a new name for themselves.
It's kind of like that, right?
That's so interesting.
And it's not just about the name itself, but the concept behind it.
Okay.
China now represents like a distinct sovereign nation state, separate from other countries.
Right.
Which was much more in line with how the West viewed the world.
Yeah, makes sense.
At that time.
But how did the Qing government feel about this new Western-influenced name?
Well, the first official diplomatic use of Zongo appears in the Treaty of Nanking in 1842.
Yeah, and this treaty is super important because it ended the First Opium War.
Yeah, big consequences.
And what's fascinating is that the Qing government, they used Zongo, but they used it with a sense of traditional pride.
Right.
To them, it still emphasized that idea of the...
Central or Middle Kingdom.
Central Kingdom. So they're using the same name.
Yeah.
But with different meanings in mind.
Totally different meaning. Talk about a cultural disconnect.
Right. So it really shows how the same word can have multiple layers of meaning.
Multiple layers.
Depending on who's using it.
Exactly.
And it wasn't until the 1911 Xinhai Revolution.
Right, which overthrew the Qing dynasty.
And the establishment of the Republic of China in 1912 that China finally, officially became part of the country's name.
Oh, right.
So China, as we know it, is really a product of the 20th century.
That's right.
Who knew a name could have such a complex history?
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it, right?
Yeah, it really makes you think about how we understand Chinese identity and its place in the world today.
Yeah. How has that name shaped our perceptions of China?
Yeah. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Oh, man, already.
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun.
It really does.
But the exploration doesn't have to end here.
No way.
So go out there, do some research of your own.
Yeah, check it out.
And see what other insights you uncover about the history of China.
There's so much to discover.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
See ya.